Good afternoon and welcome to our regular council meeting for Tuesday, May 23rd, 2023. I'll call the meeting to order at 5 p.m. First item on the agenda, 1.1 Land Acknowledgement. The town of Coaldale acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot peoples of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot peoples past, present, and future, while recognizing their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. The town of Coaldale is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region Number 3. For those that didn't get the memo that are watching from home today regarding everybody wearing yellow, I just wanted to acknowledge two organizations that we're acknowledging this week. The first one is the Community Disability Service Workers Appreciation Week, and we've been requested to show support by wearing yellow, which members of council were doing today along with our CAO. And the other organization that we're celebrating this week is our Operations Department as part of National Public Works Week. That's happening from May 21st to 27th. So back to the agenda item 1.2, conflict of interest declaration, pecuniary and non-pecuniary. Are there any in the room this afternoon? None declared, thank you. Moving on to the acceptance of the agenda. That was part of your package under 2.1, meeting agenda for May 23rd, 2023. Are there any additions to the agenda? See none, can I get someone to make a motion that council adopt the regular council meeting agenda for May 23rd, 2023 as presented? Councillor Pickering, any further discussion? See none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously, thank you. Moving on to adoption of previous minutes. Agenda item 3.1, we have the regular council meeting minutes from May 8th, 2023. Are there any errors or omissions in the minutes? Thank you. Someone care to make a motion to adopt the minutes as circulated? Councillor Reese. Any further discussion? See none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is agenda item under 5.1 public hearing. I'll call our Director of Growth and Investment, Cameron Mills, to present. And it's regarding Offsite Levy Bylaw 866-P-03-23.
Very much. PowerPoint presentation.
So I'm going to call the public hearing to order at 5:05 p.m. regarding agenda item 5.1 to consider second and third reading for the Offsite Levy Bylaw 866-P-03-23. We have our Director of Growth and Investment, Cameron Mills, to introduce the subject matter of this public hearing. So Cameron, you're ready, go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor Van Rijn and Council. Thank you for having me. What we have in front of you today is, well, what we are holding right now is a public hearing to consider Bylaw 866-P-03-23, which is the bylaw updating the town's off-site levies, which is administratively a fairly important endeavor that we try to engage in periodically. And it's a project that's been going on for a fair bit of time for us. We're very excited to get potentially to the finish line here tonight. Before I start, I do want to point out that Jason Siemens is here with us today. Jason's been incredibly important in terms of this project. He's put in more than a year's work in terms of getting us to the point we are today, and it's not work that I think reasonably the town could have done without him. So very much appreciate his support of the project. The staff report that's provided is obviously fairly extensive. I've prepared a PowerPoint presentation which touches on some of these items, but provides some additional details. So I'm going to run through that, and then at that point, if there's questions from the hearing or from council, I'm happy to So first of all, some background on the project. Quite a bit of information on this slide. A few of the things I want to point out is that the current offsite levy bylaw that we have in place is a little over 15 years old. Obviously, the town has changed dramatically over that time, as have things like the cost of infrastructure, as I'm sure council is aware. And in addition to that, one of the things that's important to note is that we did go out to tender on this project, and ISL Engineering and Land Services was awarded. That is the engineering side of ISL Services. ISL also provides us with some planning support, two sides of the same coin, if you will. So these are the engineers from ISL, and ultimately that contract was awarded back in July of 2021. So almost 2 years now that we've been working on this project. A lot of detail goes into it, a lot of supporting work that isn't necessarily clear to see, but it's an incredibly detailed project. As far as offsite levies go in Coaldale, the initial one from 2000 was then replaced with the bylaw that we have in place now from 2008, which was amended briefly to include annex lands following our most recent annexation from the county. So really quickly, there are a number of tasks associated with this type of project. I'm just going to breeze through them really quickly. It begins with a review of the existing offsite levy bylaw, and following that, it reviews items to include in the offsite levy bylaw in terms of what projects might potentially be available for this type of review. Moving into that, we review offsite levy bylaws from neighboring municipalities to try and understand how various comparator or neighboring municipalities might approach this important issue for their municipality. And then we review potential development areas in terms of the infrastructure that's going to be required. So that's establishing whether we look at, for example, a 25-year growth horizon, or whether we look at all properties within the town boundary, or those types of considerations. We look at developing potential servicing costs per development area, and then ultimately the sixth task is we come up with an offsite levy calculation, which allocates expected costs and benefiting areas for future infrastructure. Following that, we enter into community engagement. So in this case, we built an engagement plan, and we held a stakeholder workshop where we invited members of the development community personally to attend. So we reached out to all of the people, either within Coaldale or within the region, that are developers, and we asked them to provide input once we had a reasonably established rate to discuss. Two members of the development community did choose to attend that, and we did receive some feedback. Generally, the feedback we received at that point was that the levy rates were within a reasonable range. What they did want to see was some consideration for things like flexibility in terms of timing of payments and things like that, and that's something that we have since then built into the plan. Following that, we've also done community consultations, so we've had the potential to review the opportunity online for members of the broader community. We have not received any feedback from the broader community on this issue, which isn't necessarily surprising for us administratively. It's a very technical issue that the average ratepayer doesn't typically sort of get energized about, but it is important for us administratively. And then we also provided an FAQ sheet that was provided to certain members of the development community that chose not to attend the stakeholder engagement. And then finally, reporting. ISL Engineering has prepared a detailed report, which is attached to our agenda item within your package. Projects, and then we classify the projects as follows: either priority 1, which is suitable offsite levy projects with established cost estimates, or priority 1A, which is suitable offsite levy projects with established cost estimates that have been initialized or completed. Therefore, offsite levies spent to date have to be considered in that calculation. And then priority 1B is suitable levy projects with order of magnitude cost estimates that need to be refined as more detailed cost estimates become available in the future. Taking a look at our levy projects, let's understand how this is incorporated. And if you look at your attachment from ISL, in order to keep the PowerPoint of a reasonable length, I don't get into specific detail with respect to every project, but ultimately what we've done here is we have identified 3 water infrastructure projects, all within that priority 1. So projects W1 and W2 have to do with the distribution system capacity, redundancy, and fire flows that support growth in the north and west of Coaldale. And then W3 is the project we typically refer to as a water reservoir expansion. And then if you look at how the calculation is done, the project itself factors in a cost estimate that exists either today or whenever the estimate was made, and then it considers a year where construction is estimated to occur. And then within the document, you'll note that there are inflationary factors considered for every year. So obviously we know what the inflation rate was in 2021, so we might apply an actual rate there. And then moving forward, we have some estimates with respect to what inflation will be in 2024 and 2025 and so on and so forth. And then lastly, a growth benefit percentage is applied. So in this case, the W3, the water reservoir, the estimate or the benefit is considered to be 75% benefiting new growth and 25% benefiting existing areas. And so that value of 9,560,179 is the estimate based on a 2028 construction of a project of which 75% is applied to the levy calculation. So that's how all of that works in. Inflation is built in, timing is built in. All of those are, of course, estimates. That doesn't require us to build in 2028. If we happen to build in 2027 or 2029, that's simply something the municipality has to deal with. And that's why you want to revise your levies periodically over time to make those adjustments. Ultimately, what we find is from the water infrastructure using those projects, we require a total of $14.5 million, which applies $53,000, just over $53,000 per hectare within the development area as being required for levies to fund water projects. Looking at wastewater projects, again, we have 5 projects identified here with varying rates of growth benefit over varying periods of time, with a total levy requirement of just under $19 million, being $68,000 per hectare required to fund our wastewater projects. Stormwater projects, we haven't included any stormwater projects in our ultimate calculation, so developers are not on the hook for any additional stormwater projects. We have obviously larger scale projects such as the Malloy Drain, which could have been certainly levy eligible, but from our perspective, new development with their provided stormwater management, which will be able to provide that without contributing to the broader projects. Transportation projects, we have 9 projects identified of various costs. Transportation projects probably have the greatest potential for having benefit calculated as being part of existing projects, which is why a number of them have, say, a 50% growth benefit applied rather than a 75 or 90 or 100% growth benefit associated with them. When we look at those levy calculations, we see about $18.4 million of levies required in order to fund these projects. Again, totaling $66,000 or just under $67,000 per hectare required. We also look at facility projects. Facility projects are something that the new MGA allowed us to consider as part of our levy calculations. Priority 1A projects, so these are projects which are already completed but are still eligible for levy funding, would have been the recreation center, the fire hall expansion, and the mountain bike park. And we've applied values of those that's shown in the right-hand column. Those aren't benefit area or benefit percentage calculations. Those are simply broader project cost calculations. And then looking at priority 1B projects, which is to say projects which are reasonably on the horizon, but for which detailed engineered cost estimates aren't necessarily available. So for example, we look at the replacement of the pool. Now, based on 2022 dollars, we've applied a price tag to that of just over $20 million. As council's aware, the construction of a new pool is going to range in price from $10 to $40 million, depending on the scope at which you want to undertake the project. But realistically, a $20 million price tag is a reasonable assumption for something like that. A second sheet of ice at almost $12 million. A second fire hall, which is fundamentally only required to support growth. There's no need for an additional fire hall within the town's existing boundaries. It's going to cost approximately $6.7 million, and also potentially the skate park is a more minor project. We have a $300,000 valuation there. The reason we're including this is to show that there are any number of additional projects that we could use to add to the levy. And if we added these projects to the levy rate, we might get a levy as high as $300,000 a hectare or more potentially. From administration's perspective, these are projects that we have left out of the proposed levy as deference to some members of the development community who might want to see those levy rates not rise in exorbitant amounts. And we just wanted to make sure that it was clear that the levy rate we're proposing is far from the full cost of growth as far as we're concerned. We believe that is shared between existing residents and the development community based on the numbers we've provided. This is just about how area determinations are calculated, a lot of information there. What I want to highlight is the idea of gross versus net area. Our existing offsite levy bylaw, just over $85,000 per hectare, is a gross area calculation. So if you take a 160-acre quarter section and you have 20 acres of storm pond on there and various other municipal reserve and other types of things, the levies are applied to the entire area, the entire 160 acres. And that's what's known as a gross area calculation. What we are doing is moving to a net area calculation. There's two really reasons why we support moving to a net area calculation. First of all, we think it's a more fair approach to the developer. If the developer happens to build more park space or larger stormwater ponds, removing those areas from the acreage calculation, from our perspective, is reasonable. If they're over dedicating MR, and taking that, putting it into park space, them not paying levies on that, provides them some financial support for doing so, and ultimately it's of a community benefit. The other thing, and frankly from my perspective the more important thing, is that this aligns us with the city of Lethbridge. The reason I believe that's important is that when you look at developers on a regional scale, larger scale developers who might be looking at projects in Lethbridge versus comparing other projects, is we want to give them the opportunity to compare Coaldale's potential to Lethbridge's potential on an apples to apples basis, right? To use a fond colloquialism from my university days. But realistically, what we've done is we've outlined how we calculate the levies, and we've used the same metric as the city of Lethbridge. And so when we say we have a $184,000 levy proposal, that is calculated, to the meter, the same as the way the city does it. So if the city's rates are $290,000 or $300,000, we know that our discount is exactly what it appears to be, rather than requiring the developer to do some complicated math. If that makes sense. Just provide a bit of a map showing some of our growth areas in terms of how we calculate or how we consider the various areas. And then looking at rate considerations. So how do we allocate grant funding? Well, fundamentally speaking, we believe that grant funding is fundamentally variable. And with any of these projects, consider that only a certain portion of the project is allocated to the levy. So for example, where a project shows 50% of the project is covered by the developer, that means 50% of the project is covered by the existing taxpayer. Our perspective on this is really two things. First of all, we don't know what grants are available until they're made available. So for us to forecast that in 2027 we'll receive $1 million grant to upgrade an intersection is not reasonable. We can't possibly have any way of estimating that. And second of all, we would approach that grant funding from the province would cover the existing municipality's contribution towards that project rather than the developers. So from our perspective, grant funding should not be allocated to that calculation. Inflation is built in. We do not calculate borrowing costs. We do have the ability to consider what the municipality's borrowing costs will be to fund some of these projects, and in fact to build that cost into a payment the developer will make, so to increase the levy rates accordingly. We don't believe that that's reasonable. We simply don't know what our borrowing costs will be for any of these projects, so we feel that leaving it out is appropriate. We also factor in the amount of offsite levies we currently have and deduct that from the amount that we deem to be required to collect moving into the future. We have done a reasonably strong comparative analysis of other municipalities. What you do find is that the municipalities that haven't updated these bylaws in a significant amount of time, like Coaldale, tend to be fairly low, and municipalities that have updated them reasonably tend to be, in most cases, significantly higher than where Coaldale is currently. The range is substantial. What Coaldale is proposing of the $184,765 is approximately in line with what you might see, a little bit higher than what you're going to see in Colehurst, but generally substantially lower than what you might see in High River, which does have the opportunity for $144,000 as a minimum, but that's only within a very specific development area. The broader area tends to pay the higher rate. Lethbridge is coming in at $290,000 per hectare this year, and that moves as high as $316,000 by the end of the existing council term. So what we find here is that in year one, the benefit to the developer in Coaldale versus Lethbridge is $105,000 per hectare lower, and that moves to $131,000 per hectare lower by year 4 of the city's application, which is about a $53,000 per acre difference. So two things we think are important to consider are, when you look at development, how are development costs ultimately factored in? So when a developer looks at a project, looks at a raw piece of land, there are fundamentally four pillars that factor into what development costs. And those factors are land acquisition, levy, development cost, and profit. When I use the term profit, I mean economic profit, so that factors in opportunity cost, the ability to invest elsewhere, and so on and so forth. And one of the things that is ultimately very important is that what is commonly heard, if I'm a representative of the development community, when I look at something like this, is to suggest that any increase to a levy rate fundamentally decreases developer profit on a one-to-one basis, as if Pillar 2 and Pillar 4 are attached at the hip. And what I might suggest to you is that within the immediate term, that is likely true, but what ultimately happens when a municipality undervalues their levy rates is what you do then is that you drive up the land rates, right? So if I own a quarter section on the edge of town and I know that the levy rates are substantially lower than they should be, I then charge a potential developer more for my land because I realize that their profit, they have the ability to charge excess profits. And so rather than the land being valued at say $50,000 an acre, the person selling the land might be able to sell it for $60,000 an acre. And the developer looks at that and says, well, my levies are low, and so even if I pay more for the land, the levies are low, I'm still profitable, the project still works. And so from a municipal perspective, there's no benefit to artificially inflating the cost of land around town. That value should be reasonably accessible. We want to make sure that we capture some of that value and make sure that it pays for some of the infrastructure. It's very much an impossibility to calculate with any certainty what those values are, but it is important to consider that those things over time, again, tomorrow, the land is already purchased, right? In the very short term, it doesn't affect land price, but in the long term, it absolutely does. And from our perspective, at the rates we're looking at and the discount relative to leverage within the region, we believe we're in a situation where likely an existing landowner can overcharge for their land based on the fact that our rates are so much lower than comparable with whom we are competing. Then there's the question of levy rates as it affects residential versus non-residential development. So, take for instance how a levy rate is applied to a project like the West Coaldale Industrial Area Structure Plan. And as council will recall, we do in fact have an incentive policy in place that allows for the adjustment of those levies back to what our levy rates currently are. The reason it's really important to consider that is that the residential development industry and the non-residential development industry, particularly industrial development, are really not the same, right? So while developer costs are fundamentally the same, a cost of a meter of pipe or a cost of a meter of road, whether it's a road in the industrial park or a road in a residential subdivision, are fundamentally the same. The reality is that the other factors that go into this equation are very much not the same. So when you consider something like, for example, cottonwood, if you look at the lands that exist in cottonwood that are for sale right now, we've got lots that are approximately 0.22 acres, and those are marketed right now for say $165,000. And then you consider that land in the industrial park tends to be marketed on a per acre price point. So what you might hear in the industrial park is to say, well, we're selling for land in the 200,000s, for example, and there's some concern that we might have to see land values in the industrial park increase to the high twos, for example. Well, that $173,000 lot in cottonwood on a per acre basis is $660,000 an acre. So while levy, and when we're talking about levy rates, we're talking about, levy rates which are fundamentally $80,000 an acre all in, something in that range, 184 divided by 2.471. Whatever the numbers are. When you consider the fundamental difference between residential rates and non-residential rates, it's fundamentally massive in terms of the returns. The difference is also that the market for industrial land is set by the incentive one of the most common developers have to produce it, which is to say municipalities tend to engage in the development of industrial parks. And the reason for that is that the tax revenues from industrial parks are much more massively beneficial than the tax revenues from residential development.
Cameron, what you're just talking about, I think, is very important. Could I just get you to repeat that one more time, like cost per acre non-residential compared to residential?
Yeah, so basically what I'm saying, and obviously like one project is different from another, but just looking at an existing snapshot of the Cottonwood development right now, the per acre sale price of lots in Cottonwood right now is approximately $660,000 per acre. In the industrial park, the town of Coaldale was selling land at 185,000 per acre, and the new industrial park that's going to be coming up is going to be selling somewhere in the 250 or more $1,000 per acre range, but it's going to be less than $300,000. Which obviously $300,000 is a lot on a per acre basis, especially compared to what land sales were happening previously. But even at that high value, it's less than half of what the returns are on the residential side. And that's why the residential side can afford to pay a higher contribution of levies than what a comparable industrial park might pay. If that makes sense. The other reality is that the price that you can charge for industrial land is depressed because municipalities within the region fundamentally put land online where the profit needs to be far less than what a developer is going to expect as a profit from a residential development, because ultimately, as we know, we want that tax base, right? So if you think about a business that's come into Coaldale recently, you think about Fortis coming into Coaldale, you think about the amount of tax revenue generated from a business like that, an investment like that. Well, the fact that Fortis is here doesn't, inch us closer to needing to twin the arena or to build a new pool or to provide all sorts of other services which increase our operating costs. The folks in Fortis don't really care how many sheets of ice exist. They just want to run their business, right? And so industrial, while it varies from municipality to municipality, the return from industrial development is far more lucrative for municipality than is residential development, which often costs as much or more than is fundamentally returned. There are other reasons to want to grow, but it's not really that we sort of chase residential tax revenue. What we want to do is, in fact, increase our ratio of non-residential tax to residential tax in order to better pay for services. That's a whole other hour-long conversation we can have, and you've heard me talk about it many, many times, so I'll stop. Does that answer your question? So for that, that gets me to the end of my presentation. There's also obviously a lot of information in the staff report that I just sort of breezed over, so happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
Okay, thank you. If you could just back up and go over when you met with the development community, like how many developers were in attendance and some of the ideas that they brought up that you incorporated into the bylaw.
Right, so we did reach out, like I said, we reached out to everyone who had developed within Coaldale in the last matter of, I would say 2 decades or so. And on top of that, we also reached out to developers within the broader region who may not have developed in Coaldale previously. Ultimately, only 2 developers chose to attend. But both of those developers' perspective was the rates that we're proposing were fine, especially relative to the discount from Lethbridge. What their concern was the need to, their concern had more to do with the sort of need to pay those levies up front rather than sort of build them in over time as lots come online. And when you consider some of the interest rates the developers tend to pay to finance some of these projects, that makes a lot of sense to me. And so we have built into the bylaw the capacity to provide a more flexible payment schedule for the development community that allows them to avoid borrowing and carrying costs for the upfront payment of some of those levies.
Okay. Thank you. I'll open up to council. Any questions for our presenter? Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and through Beauchamp. Thank you so much for this presentation. You answered a few of my questions about in your presentation with regards to levies without grants. I appreciate learning that, and I believe that in some cases developers are cognizant of the fact that eventually some grants do come into play if they're available at the time of application. So saying this now without having grants built into the formula, I think is a wise decision. The other thing I wanted to bring up with regards to development, I think that from my experience on council is that we have not had the experience of having our industrial park developed by developers. Generally, the municipality has been the developer there, whereas with residential, you have considerably a lot more interest from developers to develop a subdivision like Parkside
questions from council. Can I just get you to touch base again on the calculation? Like you said, the offsite levies won't cover storm ponds, but they're the developers responsible for the cost of those initial installation of the storm ponds.
Right, and so we don't foresee any sort of major, broader, town-wide infrastructure required to manage the storms. We have the Malloy project, which is underway, which is sort of a town-wide project. But on a neighborhood-to-neighborhood basis, because we require each of those designs to manage their own storm infrastructure, we fundamentally feel that while there is potentially the potential for some minor allocation of stormwater, we felt like leaving it out is reasonable because, again, we are if a developer is building a new neighborhood, they're going to build a stormwater pond within that, and that fundamentally deals with the storm from that side.
Thank you. And then my other question is, part of your staff report and what was discussed at the first reading was the offsite levy rate per hectare. So we have 3 different amounts in our staff report, and if and all the way back from when it was first reading was passed to what you come up with now. So just for the public record, if you could give us that amount, please.
Okay. It's possible that I don't know the third rate. So when we passed the first reading, we had a value of $178,487 per net hectare. And as we communicated at the time, there were some calculations that were occurring that had to do with some updates to some of our major infrastructure plans. Those have been fundamentally complete now. And so we have a more accurate depiction of what those projects are going to cost. And that's where the new valuation of $184,780 comes in.
Okay.
When we went out to the development community with our initial proposal, the number we provided them for consultation on was $185,000.
Yes, so that's the third number, the 185. So then, based on second and third reading being passed this afternoon, the number will be at the 184,780.
Based on the amended bylaws proposed and attached, yes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Reese.
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn. Due to Cam. I just am looking for a little bit of clarification. So in the ISL report, it says that the town's offsite levies will be charged to new or incremental development in town for upgrades of infrastructure, such as wastewater, sewer collection, and treatment infrastructure. But I thought that I'm not sure if I heard you correctly when you mentioned something about no levies for stormwaters. So can you just clarify that so that we can have a better understanding of what's meant there?
Yeah, so if you look at, fundamentally the value, can I just have that? Perfect. So when you look at the, I'll get this. So the levy rate that's been calculated, so the $184,735 is the combination of the water calculation, the wastewater calculation, and the transportation calculation. So the water calculation is these 3 projects, and in order to fund these 3 projects based on this growth benefit estimate and this projected year is $53,041 per hectare. So it's $53,000 plus $68,834 for wastewater, plus 0 for stormwater, plus $66,978 for transportation, plus 0 for facilities. So that's where it's the 66 plus the 68 plus the 53, which arrives at the total calculation.
That answer your question.
Yeah, I think so. That'll do.
So if I'll just expand perhaps on the stormwater issue. Sorry.
Do you want me to explain stormwater a little bit further?
Sure.
The Malloy projects.
And come sit at the table here, please.
Just, yeah. So it's Jason Siemens, Manager of Development Engineering. So I guess the primary rationale for not including the stormwater projects the major stormwater projects Cam spoke of, being Moy 2A, which was recently completed, and Moy 2B, which we're planning for now, is that they're funded for existing conditions only. So that's the big thing right there, is we're not building storage for development, we're just building storage primarily to deal with off-site flows impacting the town. So even though they're large projects, there really isn't any storage included for development of the adjacent lands.
But the adjacent lands will build their own stormwater capacity so as to not require.
On-site storm would be built on a development basis, no different than, say, the pipe infrastructure.
So if we were to calculate stormwater, there might be some argument at some point to, say, for example, sizing up some of the pipe, which might connect some of the stormwater management projects in town. But the valuation of those projects is small enough, and the developer contribution to that would be so small that it fundamentally creates, if we're going to sort of track dollar for dollar projects, which are very minor in nature, it's the administrative cost of doing that outweighs the value of including it in the calculation. So the more complex we make the calculation, the more work it is for our administrative team to manage every dollar that comes in and track it over a period of 20 years before we ultimately expend it on some of these projects, which might happen in 2045, for example.
Perfect, thank you.
And then, just so that I get it straight, Cameron, I'm just gonna get you to go over that one more time. Price per acre compared to the price per acre when it comes to residential.
Sure.
And if you can explain if with the increase in offsite levies, if they were to be passed this afternoon, what kind of an effect that would have on the developer? If you're able to answer that.
Sure. So in terms of the valuation, so offsite levies are calculated on a per hectare basis. Myself, I tend to think of things on an acre basis, as do most members of the development community. So 2.471 acres per hectare. So when we look at this, again, we look at not just the levy rate itself, but the relative levy rate itself. So we say if a developer is interested in doing a development project, what they're ultimately interested in is the profits from a development project, right? It's an investment, no different than any other investment. And so we look at what is the relative cost of taking on a project in Coaldale versus engaging in project in Lethbridge. Now, the land acquisition value in Lethbridge is likely to be higher than the land acquisition value in Coaldale, historically speaking. So that makes Coaldale potentially more attractive. But then we also want to see what are the development cost. The cost of building a road in Coaldale is fundamentally the same as the cost of building a road in Lethbridge within 1%. So when we look at the development levy rate, this is an opportunity we have to promote Coaldale as an attractive investment opportunity. What we found is establishing the new rate provides a $42,588 per acre discount relative to Lethbridge. And that discount is going to increase to $53,110 by year 4 of their established rate. They're now in year 1, 2023 being year 1 for them. So that provides a relative discount relative to Lethbridge. The other question, I believe, had to do with residential versus non-residential. So again, from our perspective, there's some discussion of, well, for example, if the industrial park is, they're concerned with costs associated with building their infrastructure because infrastructure costs have gone up. The difference there is that in order to recoup, if the cost of a meter of pipe has gone up 30% or the cost of a meter of road has gone up, a developer of an industrial park is going to look at that and the impact that's going to have on their ability to recoup that investment is substantially more significant because the per acre revenue potential within an industrial area is so much lower. Now, there is somewhat less infrastructure to build. There's no question. The lots are larger. There's potentially fewer roads and pipes. But there is not a massive difference in the amount of infrastructure that's required. But the revenue potential of those lots is significantly lower. Again, Cottonwood is selling approximately at, let's say, $650,000 an acre is the net return. Here is the return there for the developer. Other developments might be less than Cottonwood, but they're not going to go from 650 to 250. They're going to go from 650 to 600, for example. So the ability to recoup the levy payment from the revenue potential of a residential development is far higher than that of an industrial development. And that is why when we look at the industrial development, providing that incentive that we have that allows for a lower levy application to allow for or to incentivize private development of the industrial park as an alternative to the municipality doing it themselves, we believe that makes sense.
So then that begs the question for non-residential. So right now, what would an acre of land be selling for in the industrial park if we had any for sale right now?
So we are seeing secondary sales in the industrial park right now. So there are lands, which the town might have sold, which other people are then reselling without having invested anything in the lands. And we've seen sales in the existing industrial park right now of about $250,000 an acre, or slightly higher. And that is up from 185 and 144, which is where the town was selling these. We were selling at 144,000 an acre not 3 years ago, right?
Yes, and we developed that ourselves at last phase, but at a offsite levy rate of 85,500 per gross hectare. What would that same lot be selling for now with the increase going to the 174 or 178 and change?
So, the gross calculus, so the 184 value on a comparable gross rate would be something in the range of $150,000 an acre. So there'd be approximately a $70,000 per acre increase. But again, we aren't proposing that this rate be applied to that necessarily, again, because the alternative is the town engaging in industrial development, taking out debentures, taking on risk. This allows us to reserve our capital for other projects rather than burying it all into that opportunity.
Okay, but I'm not talking about us being a developer.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
I don't understand the question.
So then what we were selling for at the old offsite levy rate, and now if a developer comes and wants to develop and sell the land, a non-residential per acre, with us going to 178,487, what is that going to do to the cost per acre?
If this value is applied to that developer, it would obviously raise the cost. What we're proposing for that developer is to maintain the existing levy structure.
I understand that, but what I'm getting at is for future development. Like, so this one particular industrial park expansion, that's going to be at the existing rate.
Right.
So for future then, like I'm trying to get my head wrapped around what the price per acre. Go ahead, Caleb.
I'll take a stab at this. I've got my calculator here. Just so a couple things here is, first of all, that the 85,575 is on a per hectare on a gross basis. You do a calculation. Let's just say you times that by 0.9 to somewhat compare apples to apples from our current proposed rate of 184,766, and that's on a net basis. So you have 77,000 compared to the 184,766. You subtract the two, and what that works out to in rough math is an extra 43,350 per acre. So if you're selling industrial lots per acre using and applying the rate of 184,000 to an industrial park without the industrial park policy, the developer is going to have to either raise their rates by 43,000 to make up for this expense, or somehow find a way to reduce expenses, or a combination of the two. Where this circles back, though, is that's on a per acre sale basis. If a residential developer is using the same cost increase, they can take this extra 43,350 and divide it by, say, 5 lots per 1 acre, or depending on the density, more, which results in about an $8,500 extra per lot. So it's absorbed over a greater number of lots. That's why the industrial policy was created to help benefit the industrial park private developers, and it's not specific to the 845 development. The policy is actually applied to any non-residential developments in excess, I believe, of 40 acres in size. So it's accounting for not just that development, but others like them in the future. And that's because one lot has to absorb 43,000, which is a much more significant than, say, 8,500 on the residential scale.
That helps a lot. So that same acre of land then, selling in Lethbridge at their current rate for 2023 at 290,000 per hectare. What does that work out to per acre then?
Sorry, the 290,000 per acre is the current. The industrial levy of 290,000 per
Yes.
hectare. That would be about 110,000 per acre, approximately.
Okay, and then back to Kalen, and so based on that, what would Coaldale's industrial park plan per acre be selling for? Like what I'm getting at here, we're still gonna be,
117. So yes, we would still be, like I say, we would be at a discount of significant discount, right, relative to
city level.
the city level.
Okay. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just following up on your questions. I guess for me, I wanted to ask a further question to that, and that is the benefiting area versus uniform, and how developers might be asking today as to where they would possibly stand, because we're finding out just from feedback that industrial versus non and residential are two different dynamics. The other component to this is the assessment after the attack, after it's all said and done, and then the taxes that they would have to pay on that. But really, at front when they invest, what would be the advantage of benefiting over use of uniform?
So we have elected for the uniform area calculation, and so the benefiting area approach tends to be done by much larger municipalities or municipalities with much more specific circumstances. So I believe High Rivers has something to do with the floodplain versus the non-floodplain or something to that effect. But something like Calgary, now for Coaldale, our issue is to say we could have done a calculation and said, well, the offsite levies in the southeastern quadrant are this, and in the southwestern quadrant are this. The reality is that the easternmost portion of the southeastern quadrant and the westernmost portion of the western quadrant are 3 miles apart, right? And so to argue that one benefits substantially from one piece of infrastructure versus another is perhaps not genuine. And it also becomes very difficult. And the other problem we have is that if we do it that way, we start to sort of more broadly incentivize development in one area of town versus another, rather than sort of letting the market dictate where the next new neighborhoods will fundamentally pop up. So from our perspective, a uniform rate calculation is makes a lot more sense for a community of our size.
Thank you. And Kalen's got a follow-up comment.
I just did a quick calculation further to your question. So Coaldale, if the offsite levy, new offsite levy proposed rate of 184,766, if that were to be applied to say non-residential developments, that would be an extra $43,350 per acre compared to our existing rate of $77,000 a net hectare. But if you were to take the city of Lethbridge rate and do the exact same equation, that would have to be an extra $86,234 more per acre that a non-residential developer in Coaldale would have to come up with if you were using the city's offsite levy rate of $290,000 per net hectare.
So if I may, if industrial land is selling for $250,000 an acre, we're in that range. That's fundamentally a 20% discount in Coaldale relative to that price.
Okay, thank you. So last chance for questions for Cameron or Jason, Kalen. So just to follow the public hearing guidelines, just to go over, Cameron, quickly, how was this advertised, this public hearing?
So the public hearing was advertised in the Sunnyside News as well as digitally through the town, in accordance with the town's advertising policy.
Okay, and then correspondence for or against I understand we have just the one against that was emailed to all the council.
We do. So that was emailed. This morning, and it's been received. I can certainly read it into the record, or that might be included regardless. So the option is yours.
I would like to have iCompass updated with that. letter? And also, can we get your PowerPoint added to the iCompass staff report as well?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is to council, do you have enough information to make a decision on Offsite Levy Bylaw 866-P-03-23? Thank you.
Just a question, Mayor, in the agenda it includes the two bylaws for this, right? So are you suggesting then we strike the one?
So,
there's two different numbers there.
Yeah, we included, did I have two different numbers?
Yes.
And we can talk about that when it comes up further down the agenda. Okay, so I'm going to declare the public hearing closed at 5:50 p.m. Thank you, Cameron. Thank you, Jason. Moving on to our second public hearing. We have the Domestic Animal Bylaw 862-R-01-23. And we have our Director of Growth and Investment, Karen Mills, presenting. I'll call the public hearing order at 5:51 p.m. And Cameron, when you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's taking me a minute to.
Okay, while you get that ready, I'll just state that this public hearing is to consider second and third reading of the bylaw 862-R-01-23, which consolidates and clarifies the existing domestic animal bylaw, and which also allows for the ownership of 2 goats on residential properties greater than 1 acre in size.
Thank you. So, this is an issue which we considered previously at the January 23rd, 2023 regular meeting of council. And we were looking at revising the domestic animal bylaw for a couple of reasons. First of all, primarily administrative reasons, having to do with the fact that the bylaw was relatively old and unwieldy from an administrative perspective. And the second being for the consideration of a request that we had received from a number of residents over the years, and one in particular recently having to do with the potential allowance for keeping of goats on properties greater than 1 acre in size. And so we did provide first reading of a bylaw that would allow for that consideration. Following that, we had some advertising of that. It was in fact featured prominently in the local newspaper, and we have allowed for a significant amount of time where individuals within town can provide feedback on that through our Let's Connect Coaldale portal. And we hadn't received any feedback through that at the time of writing of the report. So what we do have is the bylaw as presented to council at the January 23rd, 2023 meeting. I will provide, we did receive some feedback, in fact, from our the head of our community policing program, Mark Anderson, who did mention some additional administrative changes to some of the language in the bylaw. Provide council with that information when it comes time to consider the bylaw itself. We did receive one piece of feedback as part of the bylaw itself. I believe that's included in my bylaw report, just having to do with concerns related to primarily to noise, potentially to smell, with respect to the keeping of goats on some of those properties.
Thank you. I'll open it up for questions for our presenter. Is there any questions from council? Deputy Mayor Beekman.
Thank you, Mayor. Our communities relative in our size, do any of them have a bylaw allowing 2 goats?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Entirely possible that they do. I
Okay.
can't say that I have the expertise to answer the question.
I'm just wondering if there's a success rate with them, or if it's even noticeable.
Yeah. The one thing I will point out as a reminder to council is the way the bylaw is written is fundamentally to allow, so we're not going to be issuing like licenses for goats the way that we would approach dogs. The idea here being that the expected total number of people to take us up on the opportunity is going to be so low that building an entire administrative process around it probably isn't a good use of our time or money. Also, we would look at this as sort of a pilot type project to allow for us to do this for a year and then to come back and see whether or not the program makes sense. Obviously, if we decide not to continue to allow goats, we'd have some allowance for people that do have them to not sort of immediately need to get rid of them. But, so we do have an opportunity to sort of put our foot in the water and sort of test it out and see how it works for us as a community. There is no requirement to say once goats are allowed in town that sort of exists forever. It's certainly something that can be addressed again down the line.
Councillor Chapman?
Thank you, Mayor. Speaking in favor of the bylaw as presented. However, I wanted to ask you about the number 2 in the analysis that you proposed. And my question to you is with regards to the number of goats on the property as pets. So I think you're defining very clearly in terms of a pet. However, pets do reproduce. And my question to you is when they reproduce, you will have more than just the 2 pets on the property. Could you describe to council what you would propose to do once it becomes more than just 2 pets?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that is handled with our community peace officers as it relates to any animals like this where there's a limited number is that animals are defined as sort of a goat is defined as being sort of a goat aged 6 months or older. So if there's I'm certain litter is the wrong word, but I'm going to use it anyway. If a litter of goats is produced, they would have a period of 6 months to find homes for those goats or any other goats to ensure that they have no more than 2 on the property.
And just to follow up on that, do you have a process by which that could be monitored and followed up?
We do not. So again, we're not considering the likelihood of more than a handful of properties taking it up on this. And like many bylaws, I suspect that this would be enforced largely on a complaints originating basis. So I suspect if someone had 3 goats and no one let us know, that is probably just something that would happen for a period of time. We wouldn't be looking to do goat inspections or anything. I'm not trying to be facetious, but I can't help myself. No, I don't imagine we would have. It's just one of those things where, when you look at it administratively, it's not something that we think is going to warrant investing a lot of staff resources and time and sort of putting systems together for something that we expect is going to be such a small impact throughout the town.
I just bring that up more out of respect
Totally
for the surrounding community and just what we hear from other livestock that including other pets that are in the community.
Yeah, absolutely.
Deputy Mayor Beekman, did you have a follow-up question?
I did, and actually, ironically, it was exactly what Councillor Chapman just asked about the reproduction. So,
And then Kayla, any other comment?
Yes, thank you. In terms of proactive enforcement, as Cam mentioned, there is a resource consideration. There are a number of things that our community safety department looks after and our peace officers. I would suggest that what we do now would be similar to what we would do in this case. Like, we don't do random property searches to see who has any unlawful livestock as it is now. However, if there is a complaint or if they witness an unlawfully placed livestock in the course of their patrols, and that's something that we have the mechanism to deal with. In the same way, if we have a complaint or if in our proactive patrols we recognize that somebody is not compliant with the spirit or intention of this potential amendment relative to goats, then we have a number of enforcement mechanisms available to us. And I'll just note that the key section here is section 3B2, and this is a very powerful statement in terms of the town's ability to withhold with discretion voting. owners. So it says here that 2 goats may be kept on a property larger than 1 acre in size where the property owner has received permission to do so in writing from the town, which may be revoked at the sole discretion of the town. So that's a very powerful discretionary statement, whereas if there is a goat breeding program, there's black and white, clear-cut language where we can revoke that permission, if that helps.
Councillor Avery.
Thank you, Mayor. So a couple statements, speaking against the bylaw. It's easier to say no up front than tell somebody to get rid of their pet 6 months down the road, because we all get attached to our pets. Secondly, change that word to pig, change that word to sheep, change that word to donkey, any type of, because we're starting out with goat, and then in 6 months somebody comes in and says, well, I would love 2 sheep. And somebody comes in and says, I would love 2 llamas. And then. So we've now started our own funny farm in Coaldale. And I guess if we want to be known for something other than the birds of prey, we may as well be the funny farm for allowing pets, such as goats, sheep, pigs, llamas, within our corporate limits to be pets within our community. And then, as far as enforcement, I believe our staff are already taxed for the amount of staff we have with municipal enforcement. We don't need to put something that's not controlled, not licensed, just allowed to have, if I have a dog, I have to have a license. If my dog gets out, I get a fine. I don't see those structures built into this, where I have to license my goat, my sheep, my pig, and what's the fine if they get out? So I think it's easier to say no up front than run into a problem in September after we pass the bylaw. And now you're telling me, because then we will make front page, that we're making them get rid of their pet.
Councillor Saylor, you had a question, comment?
Yeah, I was just curious. So it says larger than 1 acre. Are there any 1 acre lots inside the town of Coaldale, or would this more be on the outskirts? And the second part of that question is, are these lots on the outskirts that have already been annexed in, are they allowed to have horses or anything like that on their properties already?
So the properties that were annexed in, there's some provision for allowing, so anyone who had like horses previously can continue to allow, for example, to have horses on the property. So there are some provisions there. With respect to properties that are larger than 1 acre in size within sort of the existing town community, the only one I can think that might be would be Mr. Frank's property within Cottonwood, but even then I'm not sure that it would be large. So Cottonwood lots are fairly large, obviously, compared to standard urban lots, and they still come in at about 0.2 acres. So 5 Cottonwood lots would be, you need at least 5 Cottonwood lots to get to a 1 acre in size. Mr. Frank's would be close, but not, I don't believe.
Yeah, practically speaking, there aren't a lot of properties or parcels in Coaldale that would qualify, given the size minimum that's here. The majority of these properties would be those properties recently annexed into Coaldale. So you've got a couple of 1 acre parcels along 18th Avenue, a couple of 1 acre plus parcels west of 30th Street, and then go south of Cottonwood. That quarter section is technically in the town boundaries. Those would be acreages. And then you'd have a couple of acreages on the eastern part of Coaldale near the campground.
So my perspective, it's impossible to know the exact numbers, but my perspective on it would be to say, what percentage of households have a dog, for example, and if it's 20% of households have a dog, which I think is probably a reasonable estimate. I would expect the percentage of households, eligible households that would have a goat would be far less than the percentage of eligible households that would have a dog. So if 20% becomes 5%, if 5% of the 50 properties in town that might be eligible ultimately have a goat, then 2 to 3 properties in town would take us up on the opportunity to have a goat. So that would be my.
They're already allowed to have horses, or no?
Some aren't. It depends on whether they had them previously.
Councillor Pickering.
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn. Through to Tam. So we have on the skirts of town, some of these places that are 9-10 acres right now annexed into the town of Coldell. So if they decided to make these into country residential lots, say they decided to make them 1.5 acres, then are they going to be allowed to have 2 pigs, like as Jason and Councillor Avery said about, they could have 2 horses, 2 donkeys. I'm feeling the same way about that. It's like,
So from my perspective, from the planning and development department's perspective, it is virtually impossible to create country residential subdivisions within the town. So for example, these 10-acre parcels need to complete an area structure plan that is approved by council for a broader area for the subdivision of those properties into an urbanized size of development. So the likelihood of those properties creating 1.5-acre parcels, as the head of your planning department, I would discourage it very, very strongly to allow for the development of new acreages within town. In fact, the opposite is true. The struggle we have is on having 10-acre landowners, if they're going to subdivide, to understand that the expectation of that subdivision is that it's done in a cohesive, planned way to create urban-style densities which meet the requirements of the town plan. So I'm not forecasting any new 1.5-acre lots in town, and I would strongly discourage us from approving any, unless someone absolutely wowed me with a plan that I haven't conceptualized in my mind. We're trying to create fewer acreages, not more.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Mayor. It just brings up another question in my mind in terms of the size of the lot. So if we're speaking to 1 acre, where does that start and stop when development occurs on that acre lot? So for example, if they build a house, a shop, shed, a couple of other sheds or buildings, outbuildings, what would be your assessment in terms of or lot size, in terms of what a goat could, live on? Like, should it not be more than 50% of or less than 50% of the acre?
There are requirements or maximum site coverage requirements in the land use bylaw for all various types of properties. I don't believe that, again, if my perspective is that we're looking at potentially 3 or 4 properties in town that might have a goat, so I wouldn't want to engage in that level of rigor to analyze something like this. I think that if people have a fundamentally fully concrete 1.5-acre parcel, they're probably unlikely to choose to bring a goat into their lives.
So comment I have is the purpose of having 1 or 2 goats on a property of 1 acre or larger is for mitigation of unsightly weeds, grass, and City of Lethbridge has experimented with bringing in the goats. That's been very successful, and looking after areas that would otherwise in public areas would otherwise require staff time. Here on private property, for myself, I think having 1 or 2 goats looking after the grass on a 1 acre or larger parcel would be a good way of management of that property. So the question I got for you then, Cameron, if I had, I thought I had 1 acre of land and I didn't know how to figure out that I have that, they would phone the town and the town would be able to look that up under GIS or something and tell them instantly if they could have one or not.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. Any more questions for Cameron? Councillor Pickering.
thank you, Mayor Van Rijn. So these people that have these 1 acre lots, is there any development behind them right now? And if the development comes in behind them and these people complain, then what would happen?
Well, again, there's flexibility, and the bylaw, that portion of the bylaw was written from our bylaw enforcement folks. So Mark Anderson provided the commentary on that, but it is really up to the individual case for the CPO to look at the particular property and determine whether or not it's suitable to provide for this sort of thing based on their assessment. From our perspective, so from my perspective, I think the question is, the idea of neighbors having goats being a new potential nuisance, right? Is that fundamentally the concern we're trying to address. My answer to that would be that in previous properties that I've lived at, have absolutely detested my neighbor's dog. Dogs which are very much allowed, but dogs which barked constantly throughout the day. Some dogs are wonderful to be neighbors with, and some dogs are not. It's impossible for me to say whether or not to be. Some people would love to be neighbors to a property with goats. They'll think they're neat. Other people will find them irritating. That's just the nature of animals, I suppose. So I can't say with any certainty whether being adjacent to a goat for a developer is going to be a significant burden for them or not. Probably depends on the goat. I don't know enough about individual goats to answer the question super well. That seems like I'm sure some goats are very, very nice and others are less nice. But again, the bylaw enforcement officer has the opportunity, once it's approved, to look at that. And if they find that the goat is being a nuisance, or the owner of the goat isn't properly caring for the goat, or it's getting out, what have you, they have the ability to revoke the permission to have the goat based on their discretion, based on their assessment of the situation. Again, we're looking at this fundamentally as a pilot program, and when, to address Councillor Avery's point about taking people's pets away, totally understand. Our point of view is that when people call the town and ask about the provision for having goats, we're going to be very clear to say that this is something we're looking at as in the short term, so they need to understand when they bring them in that there's the potential for us to remove this down the line. It doesn't make it necessarily completely easy, but it is something that they would be forewarned about.
Thank you. Any more questions? So I just wanted to clarify something. Either Taylor or Cameron can speak to this. We did not require a public hearing for this this afternoon. So for myself and council, it's all about being transparent and open, and we wanted to have this discussion in the public domain. So am I correct in saying we did not need to have a public hearing?
Correct. We did not need to have a public hearing. We did not need to make it available for feedback for a period of several months online. This is something we're far over and above, in excess of what is required for this type of issue. We wanted to make sure that if people had feedback, that they did provide that. And again, we did have feedback from one individual, Mr. Clausen, and I included his comments in the report.
Thank you. So I'll ask the council if they have sufficient information to make a decision on land use bylaw amendment 862-R-01-23. Councillor Reese.
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn. I actually do just have one quick question for Cameron. So if it was decided that it wasn't working out for whatever reason, would the owner of the goat, would they have a certain amount of time, like say 6 months, if they had to give it up to find a good suitable farm or something for it?
Yeah.
And I mean farm, not like farm, right?
Farm. I understand. I think, again, our approach to this has been to say that we expect our CPOs are good, reasonable people, and we expect that the approach to all of this would be a good and reasonable approach that balances the need of potentially a neighbor with the reality of a situation where even if we find that the goat is perhaps not an ideal fit for the property, that we would recognize that this isn't something that can be solved overnight. So I would sort of put my trust in our CPOs to handle that.
And it's also important to make note that by no means this is going to open up the floodgates, because you count on one hand like how many properties this could work on. So, okay, last chance for questions. Councillor Avery.
Thank you, Mayor. So we're going with 1 acre today, and if the bylaw passes, what is, I've got 0.7 of an acre and I want to have goats. Does that come back to council? Is that CPO's decision? It's not that much difference in the size. It's one lot of lot.
Thank you for the question. My perspective on that is always that the sort of slippery slope argument always exists for everything we do here in town. The bylaw is to give it a try at 1 acre. 1 acre is a hard number. 0.99 acres is not eligible. The idea being that 1 acre properties are usually not 1 acre properties. They're usually 2, 3, 4 acre plus properties.
So on the flip side of that, then I've got 4 acres, I can have 8 goats.
2. Every property can have
And I got 0.5 of an acre, I can have 1.
0. have 0 goats, or you can have a maximum of 2 goats.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Mayor. With regards to the bylaw or the amendment and the land use bylaw, there was.
Sorry to clarify, this is not a land use bylaw.
Okay, so then the amendment to this bylaw, just for clarity's sake, for the record, I did get a request about chickens. Sure. So can you provide clarity so that we're speaking only to goats today, and that we're not going to be opening up as Councillor Avery speaks about the floodgates to other livestock?
Correct. So, and we discussed this a little bit back in January, but from my perspective, the goat question is a fundamentally less intensive question than the chicken question, which tends to become a much more robust public discussion. We're not prepared administratively to have that discussion right now, nor do we have any intention of having that discussion unless council encourages us to do so.
Okay, so I'll ask one more time. Does council have sufficient information to make a decision on land use bylaw amendment 862-R-01-23? Thank you. I'll declare the public hearing closed at 6:16 p.m. Thank you, Cameron.
Thank you.
Don't go too far.
Okay.
We're going to be moving on to bylaws and policies under agenda item 7.1, Offsite Levy Bylaw 866-P-03-23 regarding second and third reading. Cameron, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So to provide council with 5 options to consider with respect to offsite levy bylaw, and our recommendation is for the second option, which is to provide second and third reading to the bylaw, however amending the document based on the attachment, which is labeled proposed second and third reading. So that the fundamental difference here being the more robust calculations that go into the number, which adjusted from the $178,000 change number to the number in the $184,000 range. So the bylaws provided would accomplish that. Also, there was some administrative changes to that bylaw, just some language, providing greater clarity with respect to some technical matters. But fundamentally, the difference is with respect to the value.
Okay, thank you. So I'll open it up to council. We discussed this in length already. You can ask more questions, but if you care to sponsor one of the 5 motion options, when you open up your discussion, please. Councillor Avery.
Thank you, Mayor. I will go with the recommended option 2 and make second reading on that bylaw 866-P-03-23 as amended in the document attached labeled proposed second and third reading.
Okay, thank you. So there's a motion on the floor by Councillor Avery that council provides second reading of offsite levy bylaw 866-P-03-23 as presented. Any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. And I'm looking for someone to sponsor that council provide third and final reading of offsite levy bylaw 866-P-03-23. Councillor Pickering makes that motion. Any further discussion? Oh, go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you, Mayor. I think it might be prudent to put the actual offsite levy rate into the resolution, just because we are dealing with 2 different options, as well as a slight change to the rate that was given first reading. So I think my only recommendation for the third reading, and that would be at an offsite levy rate of $184,766 per net acre, as defined by the bylaw. Sorry. Oh, sorry.
Unfortunate.
Few people's hearts just skipped a beat there. So
Okay, so
per hectare, yes.
the amount would be 184,780.
766.
No, 1.7.
184,766. I believe is the
so that's,
That's per appendix.
Appendix A.
Can you give us that number one more time?
184,766 per hectare, and that number in the breakdown would be in Appendix A of the bylaw.
Councillor Pickering, would you accept that friendly amendment?
Yes.
Any further discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 7.2 under bylaws and policies, the domestic animal bylaw 862-R-01-23 regarding second and third reading. And our Director of Growth and Investment, Cameron Mills, is there anything else you want to add to that?
I may. So I provided to Lana a couple of quick administrative changes to the bylaws proposed. So, for example, in 2II4, remove special constable and replace with peace officer. In 2VI1, remove special constable and replace with peace officer. In 2VI4, add bylaw officer to the definition. And in 6C, service by mail considered after 7 days rather than 5. And those are notes from Mark Anderson, our manager of community policing. Would propose that with whatever option council does consider, that they consider those changes to the proposal.
Thank you. So then we'll add as amended to that motion. So we have opportunity here for second reading. I've agreed council provides second reading of domestic animal bylaw 862-R-01-23 as amended. Does that work, Kevin?
Yep, that's great.
Anybody care to respond to that? Councillor Chapman?
I'll move for. However, I do have a question before we call the question. With regards to that bylaw, would you be able to include a period where newborn? How do I explain that? Any newborns or any third pets be dealt with or something like that?
I believe that administratively that's simply handled by applying the sort of standard we have in place, which is 6 months.
6 months.
Okay, so Councillor Chapman has a motion for second reading of domestic animal bylaw 862-R-01-23. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Opposed is Councillor Avery, Councillor Pickering, and Deputy Mayor Beekman. Motion is carried. And looking for someone to sponsor, council provide third and final reading of domestic animal bylaw 862-R-01-23. Councillor Reese?
But can I also have the vote recorded?
Yes. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Opposed, we have Councillor Avery, Councillor Pickering, and Deputy Mayor Beekman. The motion is carried. Thank you. And just to be clear, I forgot to add in there the third and final reading of domestic animal bylaw 862-R-01-23 as amended. Okay. I think you're done, Cam.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 7.3, the 2023 Property Tax Bylaw 871-C-04-23 regarding second and third reading, and we have our Chief Financial Officer and Deputy CAO, Kyle Beauchamp, presenting. Kyle, when you're ready, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, and good evening, Council.
Well, just before you start, we're going to excuse Councillor Saylor from the balance of the council meeting. He has a medical appointment to do.
Okay, so for you tonight, I do have the Property Tax Bylaw for 2023. It's your first reading on April 24th. So since that, kind of the holding point there was we had to wait until Lethbridge County got their tax rates approved for the annex property, so that has been completed. So what I'm going to pull on screen here is essentially just a summary of the changes between what you're seeing for second and third reading and what you saw for first reading. So tax rates for Lethbridge County actually did go down for the past year, again due to inflation similar to ours. So when those go down, you'll see on the bottom portion here, the offsetting for us on the municipal side is that ours have to go up you'll see it's a fraction of a percentage that they did go up to balance the budget. But again, we are still sitting at a 1.53 residential tax increase and a 2.67% tax increase on the municipal side. I'll kind of show how this breaks down to the average property in Coaldale or properties in Coaldale. So for a $300,000 residential house, they would pay on average $22.04 more in property taxes. And for a non-residential building valued at $1 million, the increase in taxes would be $188.10 per year. One thing I just wanted to kind of explain to council with property taxes and dealing with the public and like we talk about tax increases every year. One of the good tips or good points I kind of learned over the past couple of weeks is when we look at our municipal budget and we say compare it to our federal counterparts and our provincial counterparts, municipal budgets are the only ones that don't naturally, our tax revenue doesn't increase with inflation. So as our costs go up, our wages go up, our contracted services go up, our supplies go up, utilities go up, our tax revenue doesn't naturally increase with inflation. When you look at the federal and provincial level, when salaries and wages go up, there's more taxes for the feds. When the price per groceries goes up, there's more GST. When the value of a car goes up, there's more GST. So what I'm trying to explain is that on the federal and provincial side, their budgets always naturally increase due to inflation. So when we're looking at our municipal budget and we're talking about tax increases, we kind of get the short end of the stick a bit in that we're talking about tax increases, but the feds and the provincials don't do that, but they're still getting tax increases. So I just kind of want to put that out there as kind of a comparison on our budget versus our counterparts. And with that, I don't have anything further, so I'll turn that back to council for any questions on this.
Thank you. And Kyle, just for the viewers at home, if you could just go over one more time the residential and non-residential tax increase that we're looking at.
On the municipal side, you're looking at a 1.53% residential and 2.67 non-residential. This, just to add to that, this tax increase is an average on the municipality, right? So it can vary between households. If your assessment went up or went down more compared to the average, it will change and fluctuate based on that.
Okay, thank you. I'll open it up to council for any questions for our CFO. Councillor Avery.
And just for clarity for people watching, so the -5 or what it was,
The actual rate.
yeah, on the mill rate, that's because the assessment value. That's correct.
Yep. So inflation on average for the town, I believe, was 7.5%. So that means the property values went up 7.5% for assessment. So that's why it went down to offset that.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Caleb.
Yeah, and just to reinforce Kyle's point, the federal and provincial levels of government don't decrease their tax rates to reflect the inflation that we're all paying for their bills and the inflation of other expenses. So that's what we get to do at the local level. And the federal government, every time there's inflation, that is a tax increase.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Mayor, and through to Kalen. And so in our budgeting program, the GST and carbon tax. GST is rebated, and carbon tax, we still have to pay 100% of that.
So I'm looking for someone to sponsor that council provide second reading of Property Tax Bylaw 871-C-04-23 as amended. Councillor Pickering, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. And looking for someone to sponsor third and final reading to Property Tax Bylaw 871-C-04-23. Councillor Chapman, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to new business, agenda item 8.1, the 2023 Volunteer Firefighter Property Tax Credit. And again, we have our Chief Financial Officer and Deputy CAO, Kyle Beauchamp, presenting. Go ahead, Kyle.
Okay, so this should be the last tax item we're going to talk about this year. So back in 2020, Town Council approved the volunteer firefighter tax credit. So based on the number of hours our volunteers put in the year before and the number of hours those businesses that have volunteers allow them to participate as a volunteer during work hours, they are eligible for a tax credit. For the individual, it's up to $1,000, and for business, it's up to $2,000. So this tax credit is essentially treated as a cancellation of taxes by council under section 347(1) of the MGA. So the total amount of the tax credit this year is $22,800, $18,400 on the personal side, and $4,400 on the business side. So this is down a bit from $31,400 in the previous year. So with that being said, these are the roll numbers that requesting the cancellation of tax credits to comply with this policy. So I will turn that back to you, Council, for any questions.
Thank you. I think it's important to note that we thank our volunteer firefighters and businesses that support them responding to calls. And I think this is an excellent opportunity to do that by showing our appreciation by canceling, or I should say that we write off the current property taxes for the roll numbers listed. So the roll numbers that are listed, Kyle, can you just explain for our viewers at home what that stands for?
So roll number is essentially your account number for your property tax or for your property. So each property in Coaldale has their own specific roll number. These are all listed. The number sequence is based on if you live on the street, address, commercial, non-commercial, etc. So it's unique to each individual property.
Okay, thank you. And just a question for our CAO. When this motion is read out, do I actually have to say all those roll numbers or just as noted?
Historically, we've just done as noted.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking, go ahead.
And just further to that, given that it's included in here, it says as listed, we could, when we publish the minutes, include the roll numbers and the amounts that council wished. But you don't have to read them out loud right now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I'm looking for someone to sponsor that motion that council write off current property taxes for the year 2023 for the tax roll numbers for the amounts associated as noted. Councillor Reese, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 8.2 under new business, we have the 2023 Community Satisfaction Survey update, and we have Jonathan Wensveen, our Manager of Government Relations, presenting. Go ahead, John, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mayor. So the purpose of the staff report is just to provide council council with a quick update on the status of the town's soon-to-be launched community satisfaction survey. This is going to go live on June 1st. In designing the survey, administration had essentially 3 goals in mind. 1, to maximize participation. 2, to establish methodological consistency. And 3, to produce actionable results. So to achieve those goals, we did 3 things. We kept the survey relatively short to produce a higher response rate, at least in theory. 2, we structured the survey around general and reusable questions rather than issue-specific questions so that trends in survey results could be identified and tracked over time. And then 3, we structured the survey around questions that will help inform council's decision-making process in the coming months and year, in particular during budget deliberations this fall. So the timeline of the survey is June 1st, it goes live, and it's going to be live for a few months. During that time, it'll be promoted on social media regularly, so people have a chance to see it and take the survey, whether it be online or in the paper format. July 31st it closes, and then for the months of August and most of September, I'll be analyzing a lot of the data, creating a report for council, and then at the September 26th council meeting, I'll be presenting those survey results to council. And just a quick note, the survey will be both available in digital and hard copy formats. The digital format will be on our Let's Connect Coaldale engagement platform, and then the hard copy we're planning on making available here at the town office, as well as the senior center and the Sunny South Lodge, similar to what we did for the Sunny South News subscription fund. So with that, I'll turn it back to council for any questions.
Okay, thank you. For the senior homes, can we include all of that?
Sure.
Sunny South Lodge. Okay. Councillor Avery.
Thank you, Mayor. And this is just a comment. I don't know if you know that recreational facilities is in place in number 4. Okay, it's just to see if we actually read it.
It's a draft.
Okay.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments for John? I think this is a good way of collecting information. Like basically had the same questions last year.
Last year we didn't actually run one. This will be the first one since council approved the communication strategy in July last year.
So what was the last survey that we did?
We did a survey for the outdoor space behind Civic Square.
Oh, that's correct.
Yeah, and prior to that, a survey for the council strategic plan process.
That's what I'm thinking. Okay, perfect. If there's no more questions, I'm looking for someone that make a motion that council receive the 2023 community satisfaction survey update as information. Deputy Mayor Beekman, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you, John. Moving on to departmental reports, agenda item 9.1. We have our manager of infrastructure, Dustin Yanke, giving us an infrastructure project update.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, council. I'm just giving a quick update on a lot of the ongoing projects, just so council has a snapshot of where things are at and where things are going. Civic Square, so we're just about at the finish line. A couple finishing touches still remaining. I'm sure you guys have witnessed the millwork. Some of that's ongoing already. It's anticipated to be done by June 2nd. Glass wall installation just started today, actually, and then the feature wall, which will be the last item in the council chambers, will be done by May 29th. The living wall, you can see there's a rendering there. That's just a mock-up image. It won't look exactly like that. That's just for a visual effect. That's anticipated to start actually next week. It will be completed by June 9th. Lastly, the AV equipment will be started next week and is anticipated to be completely finished in the council chambers and the atrium by June 9th. And just an image for any of the viewers on the progress so far with the council chambers. Civic Square outdoor space. So on March 16th, we posted an RFP to the Alberta Purchasing Connection for the outdoor rink and ice plant portion of the project. And we plan to award the work to the low bidder, who is Global Sport Resources, with a contract value of $608,750. The reason we did this was to try and get ahead of procurement delays on equipment and to use their expertise to aid with the final design of the site layout and the building design. RFQ for the rest of the project was posted to ABC last week and is scheduled to close for bidding on, it says June 6th, but it's actually June 8th. This item will come back to council hopefully by the June 12th meeting, depending on, be a little bit short on time now that I just changed that. But we're anticipating to bring this back to council, potentially in the form of a special meeting to go over the results. Depending on how the results come back, I just want to note that we did structure the RFQ to give council the ability to remove items, depending if pricing comes in favorably or not. Just given the complexity of this project with the scope, we do consider it to be a bit more challenging to estimate accurately. So there's some flexibility in the RFQ to phase and remove items if council deems necessary. And then just a note there, on May 15th, we relocated 3 of the trees from the existing site to the Alberta Transportation Lot, located over by the old town office off the edge of the highway. There's some rendering images here. These were shared at the coffee check-in that we had, the open house in the Civic Square atrium a few weeks ago. So these are the most recent renderings that we've had completed by FWB Architects. This is looking to the east at both of the proposed buildings.
So Dustin, just back to that one for a minute. And these renderings, where the walkthrough into the plaza is where we talked about doing a feature of some sort, that's being left out completely now, or is that going to be part of the RFP as an add-on, or how are you dealing with that?
So we like in the image there, the archway there is, I guess, what we're proposing as the feature, which could have naming rights attached to it, should council decide to do that. We have it included in the RFQ right now, but ultimately, if pricing doesn't come back favorably, we can easily remove it.
Okay, so I'm specifically referring to the water feature that was
The
discussed.
water feature. Yes, we're going to deal with that separately, just given the complexity of the design. We want to work with the donor that put forth money for the feature, so just giving us some more time to work on the design. We're leaving that outside of the scope, but setting aside some cash to do so.
And like you mentioned, that'll be a line item that council can deal with individually.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
This is our 2023 road rehabilitation project. So last budget with council in the fall, it was approved to spend $1 million towards rehabilitation of roads within the town. And shown here, these are all the same roads that we have proposed during budget. Post-tender pricing came in pretty favorably, just below the estimate at $958,000. So you can see all the red areas here that we're proposing to do. So 19B Avenue between 9th Street and 10th Street, and then 10th Street between 19B Ave and 20th Ave. So basically that half loop around Eastview Park. Also 22A Avenue between 9th Street and 11th Street, as well as 11th Street between 21 Ave and 22A Ave near Virginia Ring. We're also looking at performing some drainage upgrades to 14th Street through the means of adding some catch basins where we've identified some low points where water is ponding. As well, within this budget includes the fire hall parking lot paving. In terms of schedule, crews are expected to start this week. They'll be starting next week. Working around McNally's schedule, who was the low bidder on the job, which we have awarded to. They're planning to start near Eastview Park. So the work there will commence next week. It'll take approximately 2 weeks. And then from there, we're working around scheduling the 11th Street portion once school is out for the summer, just to try to limit the amount of traffic impacts. And then from there, we'll fit in the Fire Hall, 22 Ave, and 14th Street.
So before you move on, how do you plan on notifying the residents of the intended work?
We'll be handing out letters to each resident to their home, also posting up some of the park spaces. We'll be putting up notices. Eastview Park, for example, there'll be notices on the fences there. Yeah, every resident that's impacted within the area will have a hand letter delivered to them.
And then I've had several inquiries regarding 14th Street and the drainage upgrades. In the letter, will it state what that means? Because I've had people ask, what does that mean, drainage upgrades?
Yeah, each letter will have a bit of a breakdown on the exact work that's being undertaken. So the 14th Street one will for sure as well.
Okay. And then if I could ask, in the future when we're doing something like this, that those notifications go out before the line markers go out?
Yes.
Because there was quite a few people that were wondering what all those flags were for.
No, that's definitely a point taken. McNally put in their locates before we were aware, so plans for next time for sure.
And just before you move on, is there any other questions from council? Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And thanks, Dustin, for including this part in here. Is the road work going to be all milling? Like they just grind the road up and grind it up and then lay asphalt down, or how do they?
It will be partially milling. So the intent with the methodology is that we're repairing the bad areas. So where there's where we've identified structural issues with the road, basically cutting out that section of road and replacing the structure underneath to ensure that it doesn't happen again. And then through the rest of it, basically doing a mill along the edge so that the new asphalt ties in nicely to the existing concrete. And then the additional asphalt just builds on top of the existing asphalt. So you gain the strength of the existing structure and add on top of it.
And with the when you're letting people know about this mill work being done, obviously some of these streets are going to be their only entrance and exit out of the community. Is there plans for how you would address their situation in advance?
Yeah, so we'll be definitely notifying as best we can and trying to work with the residents. There will be some impacts to traffic, obviously. In terms of paving, they'll do half of the road at a time, so that at least there will be some access, and then there will be a short period, I suppose, while the asphalt is curing, that they won't have driveway access. But largely in between all the spot repairs, traffic flow will be fairly normal. There'll be some flaggers where necessary, but really just during the 2 days of paving along each section will there be a considerable impact to the residents.
Yeah, I think they're all looking forward to this. It's fantastic.
Councillor Pickering?
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn. On the Fire Hall parking lot pavement, are they changing the way that water drains off the end of that to the east? It goes down the alley where they have that steel pipe crossing the road. Are you guys going to put a catch basin in there for further drainage change to that alley?
So the drainage will largely remain the same. It'll still go to that swale. The challenge in that area is that there isn't any underground storms. We can't have a catch basin unless you were to into some sort of pumping situation. We do have tentative plans with our operations department on handling that drainage problem downstream, kind of working back upstream, but ultimately it's a larger issue than just at the fire hall, I suppose you could say, in that we're trying to look at, I guess, smaller wins that we can capture doing in-house versus extending storm from 3 blocks away, which is a significant investment.
Is that in time looked at putting underground storm to over to 13th?
Yeah, extending the storm long term would be likely along at the same time that Main Street revitalization rehabilitation is extended, so as we replace the underground utilities, heading that direction from where we finished 2 years ago and upgrading the streetscape as well, that would be the opportune time to extend storm further west.
Thank you.
And it's further to Councillor Pickering's question, where that culvert is that he's talking to on the south side of the parking lot. With this work that's being done, is there any way of putting a bollard in to stop people from driving into that thing?
Yes, it will be protected by a curb, so they won't be able to drive over it.
Okay, perfect. And then the last question is, I know the answer, but people are asking that as well. With all of this work that's outlined here, there's no deep services involved anywhere on this.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Moving on.
Next one is Highway 3 and 20th Street pedestrian improvements. This one, this project was proposed to us by Alberta Transportation. So they are coming in, starting in June, and doing an overlay between Coldell and Tabor. And within their larger paving project, they're also performing intersection upgrades to the southeast corner, where they're widening the radius. So with this radius improvement, they looked at the intersection a bit more holistically and reached out to us. They identified some additional improvements to the north there in red. So the red area they're also rehabilitating. So they're replacing the asphalt that ties into the tracks as well as the sidewalk to promote better drainage. And then to piggyback off their resources, we're also replacing the yellow areas. And this was a budget item that council approved in the fall. With the replacement, we'll widen the sidewalks from 1.2 meters to 2 meters. So it'll be a significant accessibility improvement for those using or navigating the intersection.
And then, as per that council discussion back when this was brought up, they're gonna tear out the sidewalks completely and redo them instead of adding on to.
That's correct, yeah. It'll be a full replacement.
Thank you.
The last part with that is that we're also adding tactile warning indicators. For those who are unaware, they're what's installed on Main Street on each of the corners. So they're for the visually impaired. When they're walking around, it gives a sense of bearing on where they're at. So that'll be added to each of the wheelchair ramps that are being replaced as well.
And then the push buttons to cross will be in the same place.
Yes, those are staying where they are. There's also 2 locations where there was an opening in the concrete that was identified in Christina's letter originally, and those will be repaired as well.
And speaking about Christine, did they fix the crossing? Where the railroad ties were too wide apart?
Not yet. I haven't checked recently, but I know the materials were there. It's just a matter of CP Rail scheduling it. So.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Reese?
Thank you, Mary. So the bottom right-hand corner sidewalk there, can you just remind us why that's not being replaced? Is that wide enough?
Sorry, this section is being replaced as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this, I can explain that a bit better. This corner of the intersection, Alberta Transportation has had flagged for a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
So they actually purchased some of that land from the town a number of years ago to accommodate this upgrade. And as part of it, they'll be replacing the sidewalk as well. So just the intent of these figures was to show the yellow area is what we are paying for, but all sidewalks at the intersection will be replaced and widened.
Thanks for that clarification.
And while we're on the topic of this intersection, there is some talk about the turning arrow. So right now, if you're northbound at Highway 3, there's a turning arrow to go west. At the same time, could there be a turning arrow from the north going south that you can turn east? So there's 2 turning arrows at the same time.
I have followed up with Alberta Transportation's consultants on this. They have concerns on the sight lines that would be required. So I guess particularly the sight lines with 2 semis stacked up that they wouldn't be able to see past each other, but also the turning movements, if they were both to turn at the same time, the intersection actually isn't big enough to accommodate that. Alternatively, They could do protected phases, so that would just mean the signal would be flashing green, and then the opposite direction would be red. Alberta Transportation isn't keen on that just because it reduces the level of service for the other movements. So essentially you're giving more green time to that turning movement, and then the people using Highway 3 going through have to sit at that intersection on average longer, and they don't view that as favorably.
So that would increase the stacking time? Like I thought.
Overall, it would make people wait at the intersection longer because the frequency of vehicles is much higher on Highway 3. So you're giving a small benefit to those turning left going southbound, but then putting the burden on those on Highway 3.
Because that's something we've talked about this before, like with the new school and rec center opening. Like this is going to be one problem area that we're going to have to look into further to mitigate some of those concerns, like once you start throwing a bunch more school buses into the mix.
And some of these, I guess, issues are identified in the ASP Transportation Impact Assessment. So there are long-term improvements for the corridor that will be presented. But yeah, in terms of an immediate fix, that one, I guess, isn't viewed as a favorable option.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, we have two questions. Councillor Pickering.
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn. So can you repeat that? You're saying they don't want it to turn east because of the one turning west? You can't turn west with a semi out of the lane that goes forward. You're going to be turning out of the inside lane. So I don't see how that would affect them saying that you can't have both turning at the same time.
The challenge from the engineer's perspective is that when there's a left-hand turning movement from each direction, so someone's, I guess, heading southbound, turning left, heading northbound, turning left, the two large semis wouldn't be able to make that movement at the same time because there isn't enough space in the intersection.
Well, the bottom or the south one would yield to the other one anyway.
And if that was the case, if they were to program the lights so that they were yielding, it would make the level of service on Highway 3 worse, which they're not willing to do right now. So to add that turning phase just means over a minute period, there's less green time for Highway 3. So on average, that makes longer waiting times for the larger vehicle volumes.
And that's their choice, not the town's choice. Okay.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Mayor, and which makes kind of sense in a way, in the sense that what I was proposing was like 43rd Street Highway 3 is to have independent four ways. So, you know, each direction would have to have its own turn and going straight. And it's sequenced in a, if you understand what I'm speaking about. So obviously Alberta Transportation is concerned about the stacking and the waiting time, like 43rd Street, and which has more room for stacking than it does than we would here.
And I guess if I can add to that, once traffic volumes increase, there still is the ability to review this. And as the mayor mentioned, as traffic increases on the north end of town and that intersection gets more traffic on that leg of the intersection, then Alberta Transportation might view it as more favorable to add that turning movement in. But as of right now, it's not considered a benefit to the overall intersection. But once those volumes increase dramatically, it very well would have a benefit. So it's something that we'll monitor for sure. But as of right now, the benefit, I guess, isn't heavy enough per se.
And those type of improvements, like who pays the bill on those?
In terms of a signal phase change, there really isn't a cost to that aside from some operational hours. In the past, they've been pretty good at working with us and have taken the bill for that, but I think largely it depends on where the request came from and the magnitude of it. So.
Thank you. Moving on.
Next up, Main Street revitalization warranty work. As part of the Main Street revitalization project, Tolstrip Construction recently remobilized their crews, largely through their new subcontractor, Maverick Concrete, to complete their final stretch of warranty replacement required. Final stretch of warranty replacement of the concrete that was identified prior. These repairs are anticipated to be completed by June 3rd, pending any inclement weather. Just add a note here, there will be a notice coming out tomorrow, but there is a section of concrete within the roadway that needs to be replaced just out front of Civic Square at the mid-block crossing. So we're scheduling a road closure from Thursday to Friday, and we'll be implementing turnarounds, as if you might recall from during Main Street construction, the U-turns that were implemented. So it'll be similar to that, and there'll be a notice going out tomorrow, as well as letters to all the businesses along Main Street.
Can you just repeat that again?
So we're replacing a section of concrete at the mid-block crossing, or within the roadway. So because of that, we have to close the road on each side. So they're going to create turnarounds on each side, so that basically once you reach the dead end, you'll have to do a U-turn to head back. So that maintains more parking. Essentially, we can keep parking open instead of reducing to one lane. And then vehicles will have to detour down to 21st Avenue. Lloyd Drain Stormwater Master Plan update. Just give a bit of an update on this. The town of Coldell and Lethbridge County were successful applicants to the province's Climate Resilience Capacity Building Program, and were awarded $160,000, which was 100% funding towards an update to the Malloy Drain Stormwater Master Plan. St. Mary's was also a part of the project team, but was just ineligible to apply to the grant due to the conditions of the program. MPE was awarded the project, given their history and knowledge on the scope. The intent with the update was to revisit assumptions and data from the original Stormwater Master Plan that was completed in 2010, with the addition of a climate lens analysis. The scope of the work includes the following items. There's a climate change resilience assessment, which involves identifying infrastructure that is at a heightened risk of climate change, estimation of future rainfall intensity due to climate change, a drone survey of critical drainage infrastructure, delineation of subcatchments within the basin to identify where runoff accumulates, hydrological and hydraulic modeling of existing stormwater conveyance systems, and developing proposed improvements to resolve drainage concerns with associated cost estimates. We still have some final touches that we're looking at completing, but anticipate it being done by June of 2023. And once we have completed the report and finalized it with the tri-party, that being St. Mary's and Lethbridge County, we do plan on bringing this item back to council with a summary of findings. And just a note, within the analysis that's been done so far within the master plan and looking at the entire basin, Malloy 2B still is the #1 project recommended with the existing scope. So just some confirmation that although lots has changed over the past 13 years, we're still on the correct track with Malloy 2B. Leading into that, Malloy 2B, so under the same CRCB funding program through the province, we were able to reapply for another $160,000, which we were successful in getting with Lethbridge County. And this money was essentially put towards, allowing us to implement the master plan. So given that Malloy 2B was the highest priority project identified, this funding was awarded to complete its preliminary design and move the project forward closer to shovel readiness. Due to the significant increase to the cost estimate of the Malloy 2B project since the original 2017 ACRP grant application, the Tri-Party Technical Committee has begun to pursue the viability of splitting the project into 2 separate phases to provide additional grant funding opportunities. So we recently submitted a request to the federal government to remove the stormwater management facility from our ISIP grant agreement. This will allow us to submit an application to what's called the DMAP fund for that portion of the project. If we're successful with that, we would be eligible to receive up to 40% funding to this portion of the project. which translates into an additional $2.13 million in funding.
Is that, that's a federal grant as well then?
Correct, yes. Here's just a snapshot, I guess, of what I was referring to there. The top was the original scope of the project. So you can see on the left side, there's the stormwater management facility. And it's kind of hard to see, but there's a black line heading east or to the right on the page, which is the bioswale, and then heading north into the raw water reservoirs, which are intended to be reinstated and used for stormwater storage. So what we're intending essentially is to still convey the water from the Cottonwood facility to the raw water reservoirs. So we would essentially push down the road the stormwater management facility and let that low-lying area essentially flood as it does now and provide significant relief to Cottonwood by installing the conveyance to the raw water reservoirs.
Councillor Chapman.
It was a few years ago, we talked about a road that would connect. That would be like 32nd Avenue. Is that part of that as well, or would that be a separate item?
Go ahead, Caleb.
Good memory, Councillor Chapman. That was in the context of looking at different transportation solutions to the Fieldstone.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm just like trying to remember the names of different developments. Seasons, there we go, sorry. That was in the context of that planning discussion that was separate and apart from the stormwater planning discussion.
Okay. So it is separate.
It was, and that was an option that council ultimately defeated.
Mm.
It wasn't a recommendation, but it was listed as an option. But it was in a separate context of discussion than the Malloy steering committee engineering discussions.
So Dustin, just for clarification, since this is a public document, the retention or storm pond, as I want to call it, you have it listed as a south wetland.
Yes, so that figure is from the 2017 ACRP application. The project has been through a couple revisions of scope, I suppose you could say, since then. So the term that's been used for that has varied. South wetland can also mean stormwater management facility. Stormwater management facility is kind of a catch-all about what that facility is. It just means it's intended to store and treat stormwater.
Okay, I appreciate that. So once we decide what it's going to be called, if we could get that changed. And then my other question is, the property that the town bought, looks like this existing drawing here shows that it encroaches upon the property south of ours. But now we're changing that, so it's going to run east and west. Is that?
So we purchased this portion of property here. And again, this figure is quite old. So this was, we used this figure to submit to the ISIP funding grant manager. So this is just showing, I guess, what the very original scope was. But again, it has changed, and the shape exactly of that pond is rather fluid, I suppose you could say.
Okay, because on the drawing it's dated April 2023, so.
Yeah, the overall figure, they just combine them. But essentially, the main point is that the shape of that stormwater management facility will fit in the land that we purchased.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Councillor Pickering.
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn. So on June 23rd, we will have a cost of this project and design when you come back to council.
Sorry, so to go, so through this program, which is the second funding stream, the $160,000 towards preliminary design of 2B. We're anticipating that work to be done by September. So there's the master plan update study, which we anticipate having done by June, which looks at essentially all of these Malloy projects, ones that have been done, ones that are still recommended to be completed with the entire basin. So Malloy 2B is just one of the projects within that study. And then the 2B prelim design with better detail we expect to have by September.
Okay.
So we have, I mean, a good idea now. That's just the timeline of prelim design. If that makes sense. Next up on stormwater, we have the Horsefly Spillway. For those who are unfamiliar, this project is in and around Tabor and is in conjunction with St. Mary's River Irrigation District and their facilities, and essentially conveys water from their main canal to the Old Man River for emergency situations. Currently underway is phase 1, which you can see on the top left of the figure here, and it connects the highway through the Old Man River through a spillway to the Tabor Lake. So just an update on this. Phase 1 tender results came in approximately $5 million over the original budget. The regional committee agreed on shifting $3.5 million of their ACRP funding from phases 2 and 3 towards phase 1 to allow the project to continue forward. St. Mary's recently contributed $1.5 million to assist with the shortfall of phase 1 and to allow things to keep moving. Construction on a portion of phase 1 was recently completed, with the remaining spillway section to the Old Man River on track to be completed by the spring of 24. Consultants are currently working on a modified design for phase 2, with the intent to tender it this fall for construction to occur during St. Mary's next irrigation shutdown. Just to add, committee members, largely the MD of Tabor, are still actively lobbying for additional funding from the province as well as neighboring municipalities. So aware of the shortfall, and we're working on designing within the money that we do have, but also still trying to lobby for more money to I guess, satisfy the entire scope. And the reason, I guess, for those who are unaware, Coldell is a regional partner and agreed to contribute $456,000 to this project. 50% was agreed to contribute this year, and 50% will be contributed next year. Next up, we have the Land O'Lakes Drive pedestrian crossing. We recently received favorable news that we were successful with our application under the Strategic Transportation Infrastructure Program, in which we were awarded $544,600 towards this project. Discussions with CP Rail have been progressing with the recent completion of a grade crossing safety assessment. This assessment will also aid in the detailed design of the crossing and just outlines a lot of the markers that they're looking before giving green light approval. Construction package for the pathway will largely be completed in-house to reduce required consulting fees. And we anticipate construction to be commenced in the spring of 24, with completion prior to the opening of the new high school later that September. Lastly, about the potable water reservoir. So in April, we also received favorable news here that we were successful in our ACP grant alongside Lethbridge County, in which we received $200,000 towards the preliminary engineering of this project, as well as the county's bypass line project. Further, we also received news that we're successful in our application under the AMWWP grant, in which we were awarded $525,000 towards the detailed design of this project. This upcoming fall, we'll be reapplying to the AMWWP program to gain further funding for the infrastructure and construction portion of the project, which would lead us to an additional $3.5 million in grant funding. However, the $525,000 that we have received will be sufficient to take us through the 2023 calendar year, which will be completing detailed design. Design is currently active as of right now and expected to start construction in the spring of 2024. Lastly, I just had one note in here. I forgot to include a slide on asset management, so it's not really a project item per se, but I just wanted to bring it up because a lot of our time is contributed to it. So I'll just give a quick update here. We recently purchased a subscription for ArcMap, which is a GIS software that will allow us to begin updating our current asset data, so we have more accurate registry that's also spatially referenced. So by referencing each asset spatially, you'll be better able to incorporate the condition ratings of our assets rather than relying solely on age, which will provide us with a more realistic snapshot on where things are actually at. With this improved registry, we'll be better informed on what our current backlogs are, which will in turn allow us to better project the funds required to upkeep our assets. And this will tie in nicely to our yearly State of the Infrastructure report, which can be expected by this fall, which will be presented by Tim Kova, our asset manager. And then lastly, I just want to note several staff have been involved in 2 separate asset management workshops recently, which have had a heavy focus on levels of service. So one of the items we've planned going forward is to define in writing what current levels of service within the community are across all of our assets, and then try to develop a plan to communicate these to council so that we can get feedback on where service levels should be improved or even potentially decreased based on current operating spending. So I know that was a lot, and we'll bring a more formal update on this. I just wanted to, I guess, mention it here as well, again, because it is a lot of the work that goes on in the background that isn't necessarily project related.
Would it be possible to add that to your staff report?
Yep.
And if you could share that with council. Question for Kayla, is that something that we can upload as part of the staff report on iCompass too then, or can you just send us that document that you just read off?
Either way, like it's simple to send some bullet points to council from there. We would have to look at adding a slide to the PowerPoint and then amend the agenda package.
Okay.
So
No, just to send, email it out. Sure, it's read off. Okay, thank you. I'll open it up for questions for Dustin. I think we went along, asked him along the way, but go ahead, Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Mayor, and through to Dustin's very comprehensive report, and I appreciate it. And you're just part of your addendum about the GIS. You are looking at purchasing a GIS system, is that correct?
Sorry, I guess to clarify, we have purchased a subscription for a software. We were able to negotiate a reduced fee with one of our contractors to free up some yearly operating budget towards this. So this will give us much more flexibility to manage our data in-house and do it much more efficiently with people that actually know the assets. So this will essentially really speed up the process in which we can update our registry.
Is that contractor Oakland Regional Services Commission? Okay.
Any other questions for Dustin? Dustin, just on another note, wanted to say thank you for going up north and working the wildland fires there. If you don't want to put you on the spot, but if you could give us a 1-minute Reader's Digest version of what Coldell's crew is doing up there.
So Coldell's crew was assigned to structure protection. I was there for one of the 3 weeks, I believe, that our engine was up there. It was a Coldell Town engine, and essentially we were assigned to target hotspots within the region. So we were within our own district that we were assigned, and essentially each day we were going around looking for hotspots and trying to handle them so that they didn't spread into anything larger. So it wasn't, for me, the 100-foot flames that some people might envision, but didn't quite see anything that intense. But it was still, it was definitely a good experience overall. I'm happy to have had the opportunity to go up there, and glad the town let me do so.
And then question for Kaylin, can you update us what's up there for equipment? Do we still have an engine there, or?
Our engine came back on Friday.
Okay.
So currently there is no equipment up there.
So we have no crew up there as well. Okay. Well, if you're going to go to practice next time, pass on our appreciation from council.
Will do. Thank you.
So I'm looking for a motion that council receive the infrastructure project update as information. Councilor Pickering, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to 9.2, financial update for quarter one, March 31st, 2023. Again, we have our Chief Financial Officer and Deputy CAO, Kyle Beauchamp, presenting. Go ahead, Kyle, when you're ready.
So Dustin did a lot of the heavy lifting for me. So this report is designed to provide council kind of a financial update from January 1 to March 31st. So again, as you're probably aware, we do these on a quarterly basis. So this one schedule I have on the screen here goes through the capital projects that we have in the budget for 2023, and previously the ones that are still ongoing. What we do is identify what the budget is, what the costs incurred year to date, and then previously to that as well. I give council an understanding of what's been completed, where the budget is, and where we're expecting it to go. So I'll just touch base on the projects that are completed and any uncertainties that we do have. So the lagoon upgrade, that's the big one from before. That was a $12 million project. That does have a little bit of coin left here just to complete at the end of the year. So this one should be formally wrapped up and done soon. Malloy 2B, Dustin did touch base on the uncertainty of the funding of that project. Costs for that are expected to be greatly above the $3.5 million previously budgeted. Some of the projects that are completed, they did buy one of the fleet trucks for this year. So that was a cost of $56,000 with a budget of $60,000. There was still might be a few additional costs there for getting it a little more detailed for Coaldale. The auto scrubber was purchased. Hydrovac, I believe, this just happened in April, so that's why you don't see any costs here for Hydrovac. I don't get too much of these projects, as Dustin did a good job going through them. Rec Center is obviously the big one that's still underway here. Total cost of $18.88 million. As we kind of go up, the format I kind of present this into is similar to what you would have seen in our audited financial statements, and we do that to present this in a consistent format to council. So again, going through the schedule from left to right. So in the blue here on the left, this is the actual numbers for the year up till March 31st, the budget figures for the year, and then again with what budget percentage we have remaining. So with approval of tax mill rate today, tax notices will be processed and sent out before the end of the month. So we'll see those funds trickling in, starting to be collected. Same with the recreational levy, usually there's no revenue there. Investment income is obviously higher, 54%, but we do expect this number to not continue these trends as cash is being spent on all these capital projects over the summer and throughout the summer, or over the summer and the fall. Other income here at the bottom, $82,000 with a budget of $12,600. So the big increase there is just donations for the Coldale Strong campaign and some miscellaneous equipment sales that we don't budget. It's part of our operations. Those are earmarked for obviously capital projects. Overall, on the expense side here, you can see we're at 75% of our spending on the expense side 1 quarter into the year. Some of the expenses, we have larger ones at the beginning of the year. Community support, you see this is already at 43% remaining, largely due to some bigger support payments required at the beginning of the year. Finally, just kind of break the expenses down a little further so you can see what we're spending the money on. So salaries, wages, obviously our biggest expense, just under $7 million. Contracted services, property tax requisitions. So that's again funds that we collect on behalf of the residents and pay that directly to Green Acres and the Alberta government for education. That's at $3.3 million that residents will see on their tax notices that go to other parties. Other one though, they did have about the stormwater project. Dustin did touch on that. 50% has been paid already for their balance for January 2024. So I know kind of wanted to open this up to council for just some questions here. So we've been presenting this financial information as format for a while now. Is this a kind of format council likes? Would you like it in any adjustments we can make to present more detailed, less detailed information? Any questions from any of the figures on here I can touch base further? And thirdly and finally, we are already starting budget preparations now. They will begin over the summer. I'm going to present council with a calendar for the budget that they can review and approve within one of the next upcoming meetings before the summer. Does council have any other items we want to talk about or bring up as information that we've kind of researched and get a head start onto the budget? So again, just kind of turning it back to council for an open dialogue if there's any changes, suggestions they'd like to see from this report.
Okay, thank you. I'll open up to council. Any questions, comments for Kyle? Councillor Chapman.
Thank you. I have several, Mayor, and first one with regards to the Coaldale Strong and equipment sales for under revenues there. Could you help me understand what that is? I know what the Coaldale Strong is, but equipment sales for it and the 82,000, should it not be more than that?
So the majority of the 82,000 is from the donations from the Coaldale Strong, from some of the corporate donations.
Okay.
The equipment sales, there's some miscellaneous equipment that when it's no longer value to us, say we purchase something new or it no longer meets our needs, maybe it's not big enough or it's older. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll take it to auction, and the equipment gets auctioned. Say it's X piece of equipment gets sold for $10,000. Until we do the year end, that money is kind of sitting there.
So should that be a separate line item then, or no? Like,
no, it just kind of sits in there for now. That's where it's always classified as. It doesn't really suit any other of these categories well. To fit it in that line item.
Second question with regards to the seniors. Seniors roof extension, is that going to happen this summer?
That is scheduled for this year, I believe, right? So, don't know the exact timing of when that will happen, but it is scheduled for 2023.
Number 3 question is with regards to debenture. I know you have a line item in there. Would it be helpful to provide council as to a break, at a future time to have a breakdown of where we're at with our debentures and some of our repayment plan?
Yeah, so I would refer council to the audited financial statements. Okay, there's a note in there that has where our debentures are, where our debt ceiling is, and what the future repayments over the next 5 years are.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. And then regarding the items for discussion with council, Kyle, what I'll do is I'll send these out to all the council. I'll just cut and paste it from the staff report, unless there's something that somebody wants to bring up now, and then we can do the questions through email at the time if that works. Totally. Any further questions, comments? If not, then I'm looking for someone to make a motion that the council approve the financial update for March 31st, 2023. Councillor Chapman. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Kyle. Moving on to agenda item 10.1 under council and committee reports. We have a verbal report from Deputy Mayor Jason Beekman regarding the library board.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll make this short. As many of you know, the 2023 to 2026 plan of service launched back in March. A couple updates we got from that. Under one of the plans of being an informed citizen, local, national, and world. Something that's been pointed out is we've been featuring 2 local businesses per month in the community highlight. Questions that have come out about that is it's random businesses just kind of spanning all across Coaldale, as Coaldale is such a small town. It's kind of partnerships with one another. So It's just highlighting two local businesses. A lot of senior citizens, for instance, don't use social media, but they go on and follow the library. So it's just another avenue for them. As well as the library is providing 2 annual events that focus on social and political issues for just for those that may not be informed on the voting processes and elections. Another program that has launched under the plan of service has been the Learn to Read and Write programs for adult, teen, and family literacy, as well as cultural awareness. The program Culture Bite, it's a quarterly programming that highlights various culture groups in Coaldale. Our last Culture Bite was Jamaica, which was hosted by our head librarian, and the next one will be Nepal and India, which is hosted by another member of the board on June 30th. A couple of the other highlights and upcoming events, Easter egg hunt and story time back on April 12th. We had 71 attendees for that. The first spring craft fair, which was just May 13th, we had over 500 attendees to that. Coming up, which is looks to be a popular one on June 6th, Theoretically Brewing Company is hosting Bottle to Brew. It's a brief history of beer, right? There's also going to be beer tasting and snacks, and then, like I said, Culture Bites on June 30th. One thing I really like, the library is looking into granting options to acquire several pairs of skates that we hope will be a part of the loaner system for residents to try out the new outdoor skating rink at Civic Square. I know us as a council discussed that as well, and the library is looking into a couple granting options for that. Membership increase, we've doubled in the last quarter from what we did in the previous quarter in terms of increasing. And just overall activity is up, checkouts, renewals, computer usage, and door traffic is all on the rise. So that's about it. I'd be happy to take any questions.
How are you with board members right now? Do you have enough? You're short?
Board members are actually, we have a strong, solid board this term. Last term we had we lost a couple right off the hop, and we had to kind of backfill that a little bit. But this year we have a large board member. I would say 10 to 12, probably on our library board this year. So,
thank you. Any questions for our deputy mayor? Well, pass on our appreciation to the crew at the library.
Will do.
Like, I've never been to the library as much as I have since this term on council. So.
And the board, and especially our librarian, pass on their appreciation to the 3 of you for your involvement in the literacy or in the Book Buddies program as well. So
it was fun.
Yeah, are they going to do that again? Or?
They're doing it now.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But they had enough volunteers, so I put us as standby.
Okay.
Okay, if there's no further questions, can I get someone to make a motion that we receive the update on the library board as information? Councillor Reese, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carry unanimously. Thank you. Moving on, we have no correspondence, no information items, so that will be the end of our open portion of the meeting. So I will be needing a motion that council move into the closed session at 7:33 p.m. in accordance with section 197-4-B of the Municipal Government Act to discuss matters exempt from disclosure for items 13.1 and 13.2, subject to section 16, business interests of a third party. Item 13.1, subject to section 25, economic and other interests of a public body. Item 13.2, subject to section 23, local public confidences. Can I get someone to make a motion that we go into closed session? Deputy Mayor Beekman, all those in favor? Carried unanimously. Let's take a 10-minute break.